Hello students, in this session we will start the uh, unit second from this session. In unit second we have to study the Bitcoin and details of Bitcoin. This unit is dedicated to Bitcoin. So we will start with the syllabus. We will first see what topics we have to study in this unit. Then we will take the introduction of Bitcoin and double spending problem. So students, you can see the syllabus of Bitcoin. There are topics related to the Bitcoin, creation of coins, Bitcoin payments, double spending, Bitcoin scripts, Bitcoin peer-to-peer network, transaction in Bitcoin network, block mining, block propagation, and block relay. And then second part of unit is about the consensus mechanism in Bitcoin. So distributed consensus in open environment, consensus in a Bitcoin network, proof of work, then Hashcash, Bitcoin proof of work, attacks on proof of work, monopoly problem, proof of stake, proof of and proof of elapsed time, and life of a Bitcoin miner, mining difficulty, mining pool. These are the topics of the unit second. So the book I am referring for this subject, I got only two books. Actually, there are in syllabus there are number of books, 8 to 10 books are given. The book Mastering Blockchain has the three chapters dedicated to this unit second syllabus. Actually, lots of technical details and lots of theory is there. So before starting this session, in my mind also there was lot of confusion in how much details I have to go into this Bitcoin, because this is very vast topic, and there may be a separate subject on this Bitcoin, but we have only one unit, and in one unit we have to study these topics. So we will concentrate on the topics that are mentioned in the syllabus. So we will start with the introduction of Bitcoin. So already from day one or from session one, we are trying to learn the Bitcoin, because Bitcoin has the close relationship with the blockchain. The first implementation of blockchain is Bitcoin. Blockchain provided the infrastructure for Bitcoin network. So this uh, Bitcoin concept was introduced in 2008 by Satoshi Nakamoto. Satoshi Nakamoto has published a white paper, peer-to-peer electronic cash system, and because of this paper, the world come to know about the Bitcoin. But this Bitcoin always remains in the news. There are always news coming from the finance sector about this Bitcoin, because the main problem is that the fluctuating value of Bitcoin. The value of Bitcoin fluctuates, and the currency, the Bitcoin cryptocurrency is limited currency. Intentionally, they have kept it limited. Uh, so because of that, there is a lot of demand for this Bitcoin cryptocurrency, and as the demand increases and a limited currency, uh, uh, so because of there are several reasons, and because of that reason this Bitcoin always remains in the news. So no one knows the identity of Satoshi Nakamoto, who has introduced this Bitcoin in 2008. 2008. This Satoshi Nakamoto remained active until 2011, and then Satoshi Nakamoto disappeared, and identity of this person is mystery. Who has invented this Bitcoin? So we have studied this Bitcoin definition in previous sessions also. Bitcoin is a combination of peer-to-peer network protocols, software that facilitate the creation and uses of digital currency named Bitcoin. So whatever the features of blockchain, whatever the properties of blockchain, that properties are applicable to the Bitcoin, because uh, Bitcoin uh, for Bitcoin to be happen, the blockchain provides the infrastructure for Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is considered to be a first implementation of blockchain. So what are the concepts, whatever the concepts are associated with the blockchain, like decentralization, uh, is with the uh, Bitcoin also, because this Bitcoin is not controlled by any federal system or any banking system. So this relies on the peer-to-peer network. There is no any central controller, central authority who controls the Bitcoin currency. So decentralization of currency was made possible for the first time with the invention of the Bitcoin. The main feature of Bitcoin is that double spending problem is resolved in the Bitcoin. The same, we cannot spend same currency, same amount twice in the Bitcoin network. That security is available in the Bitcoin, which avoids this double spending problem. So what are the main components of Bitcoin network that we have studied in the previous sessions also? Bitcoin consists of digital keys, private keys, and public key. Whenever the node, or whenever any person which has the wallet software who will initiate the transaction, that person will sign the transaction with private key, and it will make available public key. So there is a public key cryptography algorithm. Uh, these keys are related, private keys and public keys. Public keys are used for verification by the nodes, and private key is used for signing the transaction digitally. And addresses, sender and receiver as the addresses in the Bitcoin network. Then transactions in the blockchain, the transactions are not encrypted and are publicly visible in the blockchain. So in the Bitcoin network, the transactions are not encrypted and publicly visible, so that the miners, the nodes, can verify the transactions. So blockchain miners are nothing but nodes that validate the transaction. Miners use different algorithms for validating the transaction, and miners get the reward for validating the transaction in Bitcoin network. Then Bitcoin network is a peer-to-peer network. The blockchain provides the infrastructure for Bitcoin. Then wallet is a software, client software. It is used to store private and public keys and Bitcoin addresses. It performs various functions such as receiving and sending Bitcoins. So these are the different components of Bitcoin. So we will study about this component in the next session. In this session, I will not overload you with much more information. So this lecture I am keeping very short, and only this session gives the introduction about the Bitcoin. We will not go into the much more details in this session. So as we know that double spending problem is resolved in the Bitcoin. So what is double spending problem? Double spending problem is same digital token can be spent more than once same amount can be spent more than once, and this problem is called a double spending problem. If concurrent transactions are initiated by the sender, then there is the chance of double spending. So this problem is resolved in the uh, Bitcoin network by using the nonce Bitcoin or in blockchain network. So double spending is a potential flaw in a digital cash scheme in which the same single digital token can be spent more than once. Unlike physical cash, a digital token consists of digital file, and that file can be easily duplicated, can be falsified. So avoiding double spending problem means to stop using the same amount twice. So how this problem is resolved in the Bitcoin network, we will see in the next slide. So for preventing the double spending problem, the Bitcoin network uses Bitcoin or blockchain. Same concept is used in Bitcoin and in blockchain also, because blockchain and Bitcoin has close relation. Blockchain provides the infrastructure for Bitcoin. So this is the nonce value. We know the nonce. Where is this nonce value? In blockchain, the block contains the nonce. We have studied the structure of block. Block contains hash of the previous block. It contains nonce value. It contains Merkle root, and it also contains a list of transactions. So this nonce is the number. Or in English we can say a nonce is a number that can be used only once. This number we can use only once. If we have used 0, then we cannot use 0 again. If we have used 1, then we cannot use 1 again. The nonce is a number of transactions sent from a given address. So in Bitcoin network, this nonce indicate number of transactions sent from the given address. How the given sender, how many times the sender sends the address, that how many times a sender sends a transaction, that we can calculate from the nonce number. So each time you send a transactions, nonce value is incremented by 1. So in blockchain network, each time the sender will initiate a transaction, this nonce value is increased by 1. So this transaction must be in order. Suppose we start the transactions with nonce value 0. Then next time when same sender will start a transaction, that sender has to use the value 1, and before using 1 there must be 0. If we use the value 2, before that there must be 1 and 0 value. If we are using value 3, then before that there must be a value in a sequence 0, 1, 2, and then we can use 3. We cannot have directly 3. So we cannot skip any number. These numbers must be in sequence 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and after 5 we cannot have 7. We must have 6 and then 7. So these transactions must be in order. You cannot have transactions with a nonce of 1. Mind, before 1 with a nonce of 0. We cannot use ones before using 0. We have to use 0 and then we can use 1. No skipping. No skipping of nonce is allowed. You cannot have transactions with a nonce of 2. If before using the nonce of value 1 and 0, if we use the value 0, 1, and then we can use the 2. So these are the two properties of nonce, and because of that this double spending problem is resolved in the uh, uh, Bitcoin network. How so these nonce values are verified by the miners, that will become clear to you in coming sessions. So transactions must be in order and no skipping of nonce value is allowed, and because of that the double spending problem is resolved in the Bitcoin network. So how transactions happen in the Bitcoin network. So this is from users view. So in this session, students, I am not going into much more technical details. We are talking how we can send a payment from the user's perspective. We are not talking about the any technical details. This is similar to the how we do the any transactions, digital transactions, like if you are using Phone Pay or Google Pay, and by using the Google Pay or Phone Pay, how we can send money to another account. So similarly, how we can send a bitcoins using the Bitcoin wallet software, that we will try to understand. So you will become clear. We will come to know how the users can use the this Bitcoin payment system. So you can see the figure. First, if the payment is requested from a user, if some user request a payment to the sender, then that person uh, will send his Bitcoin address to the sender via email or some other means such as SMS, chat applications, or in fact, so if we want to have some Bitcoins from your friend, then you will send some SMS, some email or chat application, and uh, or by any appropriate communication mechanism. The sender also can also initiate a transfer, or also you can send a money to your bitcoins to your friend, to another person. In both cases, the address of the beneficiaries are required. So how many bitcoins you have to send, and how many an address of the beneficiary that is required to start the transaction if the sender wants to initiate the transaction. So you can see there is a QR code, and for this scan code is also generated, and in that you can see the figure, how many bitcoins. So here 2 bitcoins the sender wants to send to the another person. So the sender either enters the receiver's address. Sender will enter the receiver's address into the wallet software, or scan the QR code that has the Bitcoin address, amount, and optional description encoded in, and the wallet application recognizes this QR code and decodes it into the something like, please send me amount, how many bitcoins that the person wants from you. That will be mentioned. Address of the receiver is there. This is similar to what we do with the Phone Pay or Google Pay also. So in the wallet application of the sender, this transaction is constructed by following some rules. The transaction is constructed with receiver's address, amount, and this transaction is digitally signed by the sender. Sender will use its private key to sign the transaction, and then that transaction is broadcasted on Bitcoin network. And once the QR code is decoded, the transaction will appear similar to what is shown in the screenshot. So in screenshot you can see from Bitcoin wallet and that sender's address, how many number of bitcoins he has to send, and uh, this Bitcoin now uh, needs to be verified, because in banking systems this payment is verified by the bank. Our bank has the software. That software will verify your details and whether the sufficient amount is available in the in our account, in your account or not. But in Bitcoin network, there are miners or nodes that has to validate the transactions. So Whenever this transaction is broadcasted on Bitcoin network, the miners will verify the transactions. So once the transaction is sent, it will appear as shown here in the blockchain. It will appear with the receiver's address and from the person who has initiated identity is hidden, but there is address and date when this transaction is created, and status you can see at this stage the transaction has been constructed. Transaction is signed by the private key and sent out to the Bitcoin network, and this transaction will be picked up by the miners. Miners will pick up this transaction, and miners will validate the transaction. So you can see in the screenshot, confirmation is pending. Confirmation of transaction is will happen when the miners will verify the transaction. So how many number of confirmations are required? That depends on the Bitcoin network. So this confirmation will start to appear as soon as the transaction is verified and included in the block. So when the transaction is verified by the miners, then appropriate fee is also deducted. Miners will get the reward for validating the transaction, for verifying the transactions. And if the transaction is verified, if number of confirmations are received, then block is created, and the block is inserted in the blockchain. So this is the role of the blockchain network, because blockchain provides the infrastructure for Bitcoin. So this is how the transactions will happen in the Bitcoin network with blockchain. So you can see the screenshot of the transaction. So there are number of fields in this screenshot. So we will see in the next slide. So transaction information is there in the screenshot, in previous screenshot. Size, this is the size of the transaction in bytes. Then weight, this is the new metrics given for the block, and transaction size. So we will try to understand in coming sessions about this. Then receive time, this is the time when the transaction is received, included in blocks. This shows the block number on the blockchain. In which the transaction is included. Then confirmation, this is how many number of confirmations are received from the miners for this transaction. Then total input, this is the number of total inputs in the transaction. Total output, this is the number of total outputs in the transaction. Then fees, this is the total fee charge. Then fee per byte, so this will represents the actual total fee divided by the number of bytes in a transaction, and fee per bit unit. So there are number of fields, and these fields are about the information about the transaction, and this information is with every transaction in the Bitcoin network. So this is how the transactions are processed in the Bitcoin network. So what we have studied with example from the user's perspective, how the transactions are processed in the Bitcoin network with wallet software. So transaction starts with the uh, uh, signing of the sender. Sender will sign the transaction with private key, its private key. Then it will provide the public key for verifiers or for miners, and transaction is serialized so that it can be transmitted over the network. So after that, the transaction is broadcasted to the network, and miners listening for the transaction. Miners will pick up the transaction, and transaction are verified for their validity by the miners. Miners will verify the transaction and then transactions are added to the block for mining, and once transactions are verified, the result is broadcasted to all the nodes on the Bitcoin network. Once the transaction is verified, once the number of confirmations are received, the block is created and block is added in the blockchain network. So this is how transactions are processed in the Bitcoin. So in this session, students, this was just a introductory sessions about the Bitcoin. Already we have studied these topics in the previous sessions also. So I have not introduced any new topic in this session. Already we have studied all the concept. We have just taken an example how from the user's perspective how the transactions are processed in the Bitcoin network. So from the next session we will go actually into the technical details of this Bitcoin. So today we will stop here. Thanks for watching sessions. Goodbye.